So I'm Rebecca Nelson, and I'm going to be presenting on expanding AAC usage across environments. So some things about me are that I'm a BCBA and I have been since 2020. I've spent the last 6 years of my career at Hope at TAC. I graduated in 2020 from SIU Carbondale, where I worked at the Language and Cognition Development Clinic, the Mindfulness and Acceptance Clinic, and Project 12 Ways. And this is when I had my first experience with kind of introducing AAC and helping develop AAC. But since graduation, being at Hope, I have overseen and introduced many different AAC systems to a variety of clients. And I kind of found a lot of passion in choosing the right AAC system for each client and deciding how to go best about the goals. I've also led parent training courses and technician trainings focused all on AAC. So we'll start with just kind of an introduction to what AAC is, some of the difficulties that come with teaching AAC to our learners, going into like a clinic-based AAC teaching model, and then really encouraging that family involvement. So AAC is any alternative augmentative communication device or system. So this is anything that is not vocal speech. Augmentative stands for anything that is in addition to speech, so it can also be used with clients that are vocal and do have some vocalizations or have a majority of vocalizations, but just need assistance when trying to express those like big feelings. If they shut down when they're having big stressors, things like that, you might also introduce an AAC for that reason. Alternative would be in place of speech. So if they're non-vocal, this might be the kind of system that you use as well. It can be used for a variety of reasons, such as genetic disorders that are acquired throughout the lifespan, such as a stroke or aphasia that comes on later in life, or even those temporary impairments where a person cannot speak during a certain time. I know that in the pit recently, they had an example of a speech-generating device that one of the patients was intubated and couldn't communicate his consent and also wanted to communicate with his family, so he was able to use a speech-generating device to do so. And I thought that was a really cool implementation of it. So some common forms of AAC are PECS, sign language, a lot of speech generating devices. I put some of like the most common types up here that I've seen in my clinical work. So, I mean, I just tested out the eye gaze from Toby Dynavox out in the booths in the hallway, and it was very cool. We don't currently have any clients using them, but the idea of being able just to like look at it, and some of our learners without the fine motor skills, being able to press the buttons, I feel like that's a really big improvement. Those typing systems, and then TD Snap, Touch Chat, LAMP, and Proloquo to Go are some really common apps that we use in our clinics. Also those core boards that you see in a lot of schools would be considered AAC. I gave kind of some examples. So in the top left corner would be that TD Snap app. Touch Chat, Proloquo to Go, and LAMP are kind of the next three, and those are just kind of the common symbols. I know not everybody knows their names, so sometimes you gotta see the symbol. And then also the PECS book, which is kind of the formal system of teaching picture exchange, so giving a picture to an adult to signify a need or some type of communication. So just to address some of the myths about AAC, AAC does not require certain prerequisite skills. You can teach AAC from the very beginning. It's just a way of communicating, so as long as the person has the want to communicate, they can start using an AAC system, so you don't need to wait for them to have a certain set of skills. Also, like Micah said earlier, AAC is not a barrier to developing spoken language. It can actually, kind of the opposite, help spoken language develop in some cases. I specifically had a client on my caseload who I know had very low vocalizations, and it seemed like when he got a talker, he started talking a ton more because he had that model, that consistent model. He could hear it as many times as he wanted in the same tone, the same inflection, and so we noticed a big increase in his vocalizations during that time. It's also important to note that as adults in society, we communicate using AAC in our everyday life. So this is like texting, our body language. I know I can always tell what somebody's kind of feeling, if they're into a conversation, if they're disconnected, through their body language. And that is, an alternative to speaking. Those hand signals and emojis all have kind of those predetermined cultural definitions and implications. So it kind of is up to society to decide what hand signal means what emoji means what. And I know for different generations, those can even mean different things. And if you're familiar with baseball or a baseball fan, you can tell kind of, if you can't hear the game, you can still tell what's going on from the hand signals of the umpire. So there are just some general ways in which AAC is used kind of throughout our everyday life. Like I said earlier, AAC can be used as a supplement to existing language or a robust language system. So kind of no matter where somebody is in their communication journey, if they have vocal language, but they need some assistance just every now and then to kind of get their point across, or if they need kind of an entire communication system, it's important to give them that assistance if they need it. And for many clients in ABA therapy, specifically at our clinic, AAC is their main way to communicate with others. So we really need to give them a voice, give them a way to communicate what they want and need that's going to be understandable in all the different places that they need it. Some of the reasons we might find teaching AAC difficult is that there's those discrepancies in recommendations between professionals. So I know that as a BCBA, I run across other professionals that might work on solely requesting goals. I know SLPs tend to have a different way of picking goals than we might see in ABA. Schools might have a certain way that they want to teach the system. So it's really hard for families when they're getting all these ways thrown at them to decide how they're going to teach their child to use it and to develop it. It's very difficult kind of even as a BCBA when, school's saying something, we're saying something, their private SLP is saying something to kind of get everybody on the same page of, okay, what's one starting point? What do we need to work on first? Because if you give them 3 different goals, I feel like parents are much less likely to do any of it. It just seems too overwhelming. The generalization of skills to outside settings is also kind of a big barrier to AAC. I know that a lot of the teaching that we do is those 20 to 40 hours in the clinic working on goals. And so how do you get that from these highly contrived situations? How do you get this to generalize into the grocery store? How do you have them ask grandma and grandpa for pizza? How do we make sure that these are actually happening outside of the highly contrived settings? Also, the complexity of language needs. So we, like Micah said in her presentation, we don't just use language to request things and to label things. We use communication for giving information, for seeking connection, for kind of regulating our own emotions. And how do we make sure that a learner has access to all these things? And then also the availability of the communication system. iPads die, things get broken, PECS books, the icons go missing and you have to make more. Some people don't speak ASL, so if you're teaching sign language, that's not always going to be understood by the vast population. And so how do you manage that if you're with somebody that's not going to understand it, or if you lose your communication system? So some of the ways that BCBAs, I feel like, can assist in AAC are that we are excellent at measuring behavior in an objective manner, and that we can help collect data on those current forms or any new forms of AAC that the learner is trialing. So, I know at our clinic we take data on the frequency of spontaneous usage, how many times they walk up to their AAC during a thing, how many items can they request, and I feel like that's kind of an ABA strong point, is that ability to measure the behavior and measure kind of where everybody can look at the same graph and kind of come to the same conclusion. But always making sure that we're collaborating with goals with SLPs, other providers, and families. We are not, kind of the one-shot people. We need to be collaborating with everyone else involved in this child's life. We also should be teaching to fluency, and so there are so many ways that teaching AAC that can deserve attention. So we collect data on all the different aspects, such as how often the client is approaching or using the talker or the AAC system, how many words are they able to use functionally on the system, how often are behaviors occurring due to that communication disconnect. So if you have a learner that hasn't had a formal communication system before, how often are they getting so frustrated that they are lashing out because nobody's understanding what they're trying to say? And then is the learner showing ownership of their AAC system? Are they taking care of it? Are they carrying it around by themselves? Do they know that this is their voice? And one of the assessments that I really like for this is the dynamic goals, AAC goals grid 2. I know that they're on 3 now. I'm stuck in my ways with 2 for now. But it was developed by the SLPs working at Tobii Dynavox. And I find it really useful for looking at the different aspects of teaching AAC usage, because it goes into linguistic goals, which are kind of those, how many nouns do they know? How many verbs? Can they navigate the system? Things like that. It goes into social goals for AAC. So are they using it as a way to connect with other people? Are they bringing it to other people if they need to talk to somebody? Things like that. And then operational, so are they showing ownership skills over it? Are they able to charge it? Are they able to turn it on and off, navigate between pages, things like that? And then those strategic goals of can they do everything on the thing that, or everything on the SGD that they need to do? Do they, or do they plug it in when it needs care for? Do they come to you if it breaks down? What do they do if it breaks down? Are they able to get their needs met in that secondary way? And so here's an example of the DAG2. These are specifically the operational goals. So they have like 6 different levels. These are the most common sections that I use at my clinic because we are working on developing that system as a whole. So do they demonstrate visual, auditory, or physical attention to AAC system by quieting or orienting or moving into action? So do they know that when the SGD goes off that they should be listening to it? Are they showing active engagement with the AAC system without intent? So are they able to kind of just go navigate it? Are they exploring? Are they touching the screen? Are they interested in it? Do they transport it between environments with partner prompts as needed? If we're like, hey, get your talker and let's go, will they go get it? Do they realize this is mine, I need to carry it with me? The next page and go back navigation, things like that. And then all the way up to, do they charge and care for the device themselves? If this is something that's going to need to become a lifelong system for them, they need to show kind of those ownership skills. And if they're not naturally developing, they might need to be things that are taught. So as a BCBA, the goals that I choose to recommend for learners when they're in our services are those goals that are evidence-based and that work on decreasing those barriers to learning. I feel like that's the best place to start, especially when establishing a communication system, is what is currently inhibiting these learners from gaining independence and from doing it in the current way that things are set up for them. We might also suggest goals for staff and family behavior when learning a new system. So we might ask our staff to model, 100 times a day and make sure that they're kind of taking responsibility as well. Same with parents. Can you guys make sure that you're plugging it in every night? Can you make sure that you're bringing it in the car with you when you go? Just so we're kind of holding everybody accountable for this learner's ability to communicate. And so we will want to target those functional targets that allow them to access more environments and learn more quickly in the future. That's always kind of the goal, is to get them to a point where they're able to learn more and more and access different environments. So some of the ways that we start AAC in the clinic is we try to teach them ways to get rid of those aversive stimuli and gain access to preferred items. So one of the goals that I always open first is, all done, stop. And I know that we have a lot of learners that get kind of easily annoyed by things. So making sure that they have a way to get away from a situation if that's important to them. Also requesting those preferred items. Do they have a way to tell you what kind of food they're feeling that day or that they're angry, things like that. This also teaches the learner that the AAC is beneficial to getting them what they need, which is what we truly want to instill in them as like, this is a helpful thing. This is not something to make my life harder or more difficult. And I know that I've had a few clients who got to the point where I think they just felt their AAC was work and they, would push it away, would run away from it. So making sure that if that's happening, going back to a place where it can be fun and be social interaction again. Making sure that they know, like, this is how I get my needs met, this can make my life better, or do we need to pick a different system? A lot of it is also training the technicians specifically at the clinic, training staff, training parents, and things like that. And so we've hosted training specifically dedicated to the AAC types and usage, how best to implement things implement the children's programs, implement those requesting trials. If it makes sense for the client and the program, like at a school setting, it doesn't make sense for several of the kids to have the same layout because then the staff or parents are only having to use one system and finding one set of buttons. I feel like that's been helpful with RBTs. If they start learning a system and they, we have 4 kids on touch chat or whatever, they can know where I is, they know where the help button is, and once you start messing with that, it gets a little bit more difficult for them to keep track of whose is whose. Also showing the RBTs and families how to use that search function on different apps. I know that we had a kid who had a SGD for 4 years, and parents didn't know how to search for a word. And so during our parent training, we went over, okay, this is how you search for it. If you can't find it, you just need to look in here and it will navigate it, or you can add it. And that was life-changing for them because they can give their kid the instruction to go shower on their talker, and it goes much smoother with the visual component. Also using that BST in sessions, so giving the instruction, modeling, rehearsing, and giving feedback is essential in training them on how you want them to take the AAC targets. And then also letting them know that it's okay to be imperfect. We have these signs kind of all up throughout our clinic that it's okay to fail when using AAC. It's okay if you forget what you're doing or you forget where a button is. You can always kind of model the appropriate behavior for fixing it. It's okay to ask for help. Sometimes the client might know more about their AAC than you do. So asking them, do you know where this button is? Like, I want to show it to somebody, can you show me? Being imperfect, it's okay to not have all the answers, to ask other people for help. And then it's also okay to learn something new, so that there's more than one way to say things or to ask for things. I know we had a kid who was playing with a toy egg once, and he wanted it to be cracked open. It was not a type of egg that cracks, and he was very mad, but he went to, breakfast foods egg. And I was like, okay, yeah, that wouldn't have occurred to me. I appreciate you telling me. We still can't crack it open, but he did his very best to communicate, like, this is what I want to happen. I don't understand why it's not. Some tips for customizing AAC are to always involve the family in what items, places, and people are important to be on the child's AAC. Are there certain teachers at school that they really get along with that they might want to ask for? Do they want to be put in the talker or on the PECS card as mom, dad, and siblings' names? Or do they want their full names on there so that if somebody else sees it, they might know who to contact about things? Places. Are there places that they might want to go that they don't have a way of asking for? If they want to go to the park, if they want to go to Dairy Queen, can they ask for that the way, a normal person of their age would, or neurotypical person of their age would? Would they say, Dairy Queen, and you can be like, not today, but we can go some other time? Giving them the option to say all of these things that are important to them. And then if the family's multilingual, make sure that the AAC contains words in both languages if they need to. I know we have a family at the clinic who speaks half and half in the home. And so they speak half French, half English. And so sitting down and asking them was, they would give instructions to their kid in French at the clinic, and we didn't know how to kind of facilitate that in. But adding those things of, adding those buttons that might not have the same meaning in English, or, don't have a word that corresponds in English. And if there's certain phrases that they're saying more in French, we want to be sure that the kid is hearing that on their talker and able to repeat that, instead of just assuming that, well, this kid speaks English at the clinic, so that's all we're going to give him access to. And then once a system is established, keeping icons in the same place. So, that's kind of why most of the systems come with a preset like core board on the front almost, and then have like groups at the top where you can navigate to the different places. It would be similar to if someone were to constantly be moving the apps on your phone. I know when I use somebody else's phone and I can't find a certain button, it's very frustrating, because I'm like, well, it's on mine, it's right here. And so, if you're constantly changing where their words are placed, they're going to lose that muscle memory. And some apps are specifically set up for the motor planning of like, everything is on the same place on every page, so that they always know where to click if they need more, if they need help, things like that should always kind of be kept in that consistent place. Also, if a system has a color-coded system, like the one up here does, you want to make sure that you're color-coding new icons appropriately, because they do have meanings, and the learner might start picking up on those meanings and looking by color, because it's a lot more noticeable than reading through all of the words. We also want to make sure that we're using the core versus fringe words appropriately. And core words are those words that make up 80% of our everyday language. So there are words like I, want, like, more, that we're going to be using in a variety of different sentences. In all of the different settings that we're in, we have a use for these words. And these should always be kind of kept in the same place on an AAC system. They're designed that way. They should be kept this way because it's easier for them when they're kind of using the talker for a variety of language functions. So if they're trying to ask for things, if they're trying to tell you their preferences, if they're labeling emotions, having all of these words makes it just that much more fluent when they're trying to use it. And then the fringe words are the words that are more specific to the person speaking. So they're the ones that are more contextual, like balloon, Jake and the Neverland Pirates, hot Cheetos, any of the colors, things like that can be kind of placed in the folders that make the most sense. But they're not going to always need or have access to a balloon. They're not always going to, hot Cheetos aren't always going to be available. They might only be able to ask for those during snack time, so they don't need to be on the main screen. And then also considering that when you're teaching an AAC, it might be necessary to start with that smaller array of items. So say the kid can only choose from an array of 4. They don't have a good listener responding thing. They don't know what all the different icons on. 60 on a page might be too many for them. And so you might need to start with either teaching scanning an array on the talker, or you might need to teach that back and forth of conversation, like I hit an icon, I get what I need from another person. And we try to do this by hiding other icons instead of making the icons bigger on the screen, as long as their fine motor will allow it, because this again allows for that motor planning to happen of, okay, these are gonna stay in the same spot even when more icons come, so they can kind of learn where it is on the page. We also want to always give the learner a word or phrase to withdraw assent, so never taking away the stop, no, all done button. We want them to be able to let us know, to be able to self-advocate, to say, no, we're not doing this, or stop. And we want to make sure that all items and words are added back, even if the learner might require some extra teaching trials. So we don't want to hide all the buttons and just leave all the buttons hidden, because we want them to be able to communicate anything they want or need or want to get across. And so it's important that they have access to, even if they might not be using it at this time. They might eventually want to tell you that they like something. They might pick it up kind of on their own, and we want to make sure that they are able to do that. And then we also want to be sure that we're moving beyond requesting. So I know that in ABA, we get really good at getting focused on requesting and having them ask for things, having them kind of ask for what they want, and then we kind of lose it at the point of like, okay, let's move beyond that. What other functions of language are there that we need to be teaching? So do we have them asking questions, labeling items, stating their emotions, and how do we teach that in a contrived environment? And so from the beginning, it's really essential to model those different functions of language. So I know in our clinic, we've had some kids who needed that second AAC system that matched their own to kind of model on, because they did have that ownership skill of their own talker, and if you tried to take it from them, it was no good. So having that, modeling signs if they're using sign language, modeling PECS and kind of doing that role play with them. Or if it's a talker, having a second device set up with the same app so that you can show them what buttons they should be pressing or what they could say in that setting. We also want to be sure to model without expectations. So modeling is the most important tool in our tool belt when teaching AAC. And so you want to attempt to model without expectations, especially when you're introducing those new words or concepts. If it's something they haven't heard before, you're going to just want to show them over and over again. I think they said it takes like 50 times of showing a learner something before they are independently using it. So you might model the icon for eat, and I feel like this is counterintuitive for some BCBAs, for some RBTs, because we're used to, okay, it's your turn, you do the work, and then I'll give you whatever. But like, we also want to be showing them like communication means something. So you might model eat and then give a bite of food. So you're more just labeling what they're doing. We also want our learners to see communication as fun and not a chore. If you're making them use it 300 times a day without kind of a break, and you're just expecting it before they get anything or before they're allowed to do anything, they're going to start seeing that as a chore, and they're not going to want to use it. We collect data on modeling. Like I said, we have our technicians and our families kind of take data on their own behavior. So we've had them work on modeling a specific word or tracking how often they're able to kind of model throughout their day. And then we also will collect data. This is one thing that's nice about an in-clinic setting is we can track their spontaneous usage of the AAC system or how often they're using a specific icon. So if we're having the family track how often they're modeling on a talker or modeling sign language, we can then keep track of, okay, is the kid using it more because we are teaching it more? And it does allow us to compare how quickly they're learning new targets. And we can also show parents this progress of like, okay, you've been working on the word all done for 5 days now. Here's how much they're using it in the clinic, and here's how appropriately they're using it in the clinic. This is an example of how we can kind of use AAC to work on emotional regulation, stating emotions. So you might establish a routine for checking in about emotions. This could be at the start of school day or the session, or even when they get home from school. You could do it in all 3 places, and just somebody's kind of in charge of checking in with them, asking how they're feeling, and then allowing them to communicate via, you might start with a paper sheet. You might take them to the emotions page on their talker. They might just act out how they're feeling, but then you're responding in a way that's appropriate for what they're telling you. You're teaching them like, okay, it's valid to feel happy. You can feel sad, and here's how we can kind of help with that. Like, okay, you might be feeling frustrated. Do you need to go take a break? If you're feeling sad, do you want a hug? Do you want any of these other things that might be helpful in the moment? And so by establishing this communication about how they're feeling and then taking care of those needs, you're teaching them emotional regulation skills at the same time. And you can also, on an SGD or on a choice board, give them the options of which one of these would you like to do today based on how you're feeling. This is also from the AAC Visualize book, which I highly recommend. It's very helpful and lays everything out in kind of a visual manner. And then we also will occasionally use AAC for clients with vocal language. So this is, if a child shuts down when they're upset, or if they are shy around new people and it's really hard for them to initiate that conversation with people. Or they talk so much at home, but then they get to school and they're too shy to ask for what they need. It might be important to give them that alternative non-vocal communication option. For example, this is one of my clients. He and his tech designed it themselves. His paper of he gets very overwhelmed when things are taken away, when he's asked to transition away from a preferred activity to do anything that's not his idea. And so we're working on reducing that physical aggression that might come up by giving him a way to get out of it. And he came up with the phrase, "Can I do my thing instead?" And we were like, yeah, that's totally valid. Thank you for telling us. We're working on that. And then we'll work on tolerating no and everything that comes after that. But it was important that he doesn't immediately escalate to feeling like he's under attack when we ask him to transition. And he would completely shut down. He would, go non-vocal. He would not talk. He would kind of just lay on the floor until you left him alone long enough. And so now we have this way of, you can hit this paper. You can you can shake your head. There are several things you can do to communicate before you need to escalate. And we will, let you get out of it so that you can feel safe. It might be a choice board. It might be a specific signal or a custom sign that will work as an alternative to these challenging behaviors. So then some problem-solving tips for AAC. I always like to plan for a secondary AAC system. So if the external AAC is unavailable, so if the talker dies, if you forget the charger, if the screen cracks and it needs to go get repaired, how are you going to get these same needs met? If somebody doesn't understand your ASL, how are you going to get your point across still? So some examples could be teaching those basic sign language that most people know, working on pointing, working on gaining attention and leading, are all kind of great ways to work on some of these skills in a pinch. If they need something immediately, if something's wrong in the environment and they don't have access. But you also want to make sure that they're getting the opportunity to practice these in the clinic and in the home. You want to make sure that there are times where, their talker's unavailable, and maybe just for 10 minutes their talker's not available, and they need to work on kind of still getting this met, because if they don't have an opportunity to practice it, then when it does go dead, or when they do lose the PEC for a specific show that they like, they're not going to be able to tell you. And you also want to be sure that you're talking to parents about these other forms of communication. So do they have a system that works for them at home? How do they communicate when these situations come up in the natural environment? It's very easy at a clinic to make sure that the talker's charged and, it's one-on-one. We work one-on-one with the kids. It's easy to make sure that these things don't happen and kind of antecedently deal with it. Whereas at home, if they have 3 kids that all need different things, it's harder for them to keep track of where's the talker at? Did it get charged last night? Do they have their PECS book? Do they have their way to communicate? Did we bring the paper with us? So making sure that they have this kind of backup system there too. In 2024, we noticed a lack of parent training involvement for some of our parents. So we ended up implementing a group parent training system that went across 6 different months with parents of our clients. And so several of them were interested in learning more about their children's AAC and had kind of the bare minimum knowledge that their client used it. They could navigate it as well as they could at the clinic, but there wasn't any additional teaching going on at home. It was more just, okay, you guys teach it, and then he'll come home and use it. Or they might not even use it at home. They might, we had a couple of kids who hated their talker at home. They would not go to it, and they got their needs met some other way at home. And so we wanted to focus on a way to generalize that and develop goals for parents. So we combined 2 curriculums. We combined the Project Impact curriculum, which we came up with as a way to establish parents as a play partner. And so this comes from like kind of a naturalistic based model, because I think the last things our kids want to do when they go home is sit at a table and do more trials. So we wanted to make sure that they were taking at least 20 minutes per week to work on these communication skills and to learn how their children played. We also had them start by picking times in their routine that they could add an additional 5 to 10 minutes to every day so that they could practice these communication attempts. And then, so some of these included morning routine. When they got up, sometimes their kids got up early in the morning, and they had a lot of extra time to spend on getting dressed. Some of them were a little bit more rushed in the morning and didn't have the time to do it. They were already rushing to get out the door every day. They might do bath time when the kids playing with different toys. They might do any free time before bed, just whatever they could fit into their schedule for an extra 5 to 10 minutes they would work on. And so we really came at it from a foundation of teaching through play. And so the tips that it gives in Project Impact are focusing on your child. And this is, see what they enjoy playing with. Not what you want them to be able to play with, but making sure that you're playing with them the way that they want to be playing and seeing how they naturally play with those toys. Also, imitating play actions. So imitating the way that they like to play. Do they like to spin? Do they like to, say certain things over and over again that you can imitate? Using animation, so using exciting words like, wow, that's so cool. Just letting them know that you're enthused. And then modeling and expanding on communication. And that the tip that it gave was always modeling that one step above their communication level. So if your child is pretty regularly saying ball when they want to interact, when they want to roll the ball with you, you might say red ball or bounce the ball, roll the ball, things like that. And then adding in these communication opportunities such as playful obstructions where you might, put a log in front of their car and say, oh no, your car stopped. Like what do you need? And coming up with like more imaginary ways to kind of block that play in a natural way and foster these communication attempts. The other curriculum we used was the AAC Visualize, like I mentioned earlier, and this is where we pulled our information and teaching strategies that were specific to AAC. So this book goes through the myths of AAC, how to be a communication partner with your learner, how to even start getting an AAC for your child, some tips about funding, things like that, and it kind of goes through all of the communication examples. It has how to teach requesting help with visuals, how to, request or state your emotions, how to answer and ask questions, things like that, and gives tips on how to respond if they're independently saying it or if they need help saying something. And then some tips that we found for generalizing at home, in the home environment, were working with parents on identifying a time in their schedule to add that 5 to 10 extra minutes, and not choosing times where they were already struggling, but choosing times where the child was enjoying the activity or had a good grasp of it. I know all of our kids have their different strengths about times of day that they're good at. We have some kids that are really good at sitting down during mealtime, and we could add extra time to their meal to ask for things, to label things. We have some kids that are not so great about sitting down, that want to run out of the room as soon as they've taken a bite, so not using it with them. And then having parents set those actionable steps as goals. So you might just start by having a parent charge the device at night. You might just start by having the parent have the device with them everywhere. And that was the first step for a lot of our parents, was just, do you have it with you? Can you bring it in the car with you when you go on a road trip? Can you make sure that it gets to and from school every day with them? And then choosing those most high impact words when you're beginning the system of, which ones are going to be most influential on this kid's life. We also used a word of the week strategy. Sometimes we turned it into word of the month, just based on our family's schedule, where they would work on one specific word or phrase each week/month, and then we could kind of work on that at the clinic, keep track of how often the kid was using this word. And we wanted to try to model these words around 100 times per day across settings. And that was really easy for us in the clinic to kind of hit that, 60, 70 goal of just modeling it. And this is the modeling without expectation, showing them when these different communication attempts come throughout the day. We used words such as please, help, all done, like, because those words are ones that you could use, up to 100 times a day. And then parents were asked to kind of anecdotally tell us how often this was being modeled and how often the kids were using this in the home. And then we could collect the frequency data to see if the learner was picking up and using them when they were supposed to be. We also had parents that added the words to their child's backpack to make sure that it was being used across environments. So it would go to school with them, and it was in a large print laminated card, and it would say this is their word of the week, so that everybody in every environment knew that this was what they were working on, and this is what we were hitting heavy that week. And we saw a lot of improvement on their specific use of those words. And then we could add in more concepts. So we might work on emotions, we might work on greetings, things like that. Another way that we worked on things was the all communication expansion. So as the learner begins to learn words, you might switch to just using the full range of communication in every environment. So you might use it during art time. You might use it when your kid's playing outside and you just want to be using all of the communication that you might want to use in this activity. So you might make requests, label items, label colors, label emotions, reject items, make jokes. We want to kind of just show them the full scope of what it's possible to communicate in different situations so that they know what an AAC can be used for. And then one of the biggest issues that I think kind of plagues the AAC device world is the abandonment of AAC. When it stops working or they stop getting reinforcement for it, are they going to stop using it? And I know that I have a friend who works in the adult group home setting, and she has mentioned that, it doesn't matter what kind of AAC they come home with. A lot of the times, if it's not vocal speech, they end up losing it because it doesn't get maintained by staff or it doesn't get maintained by the family. So we want to start by, identifying the function of why this is happening. Is it because it was difficult to use? Did they feel like they didn't have that input or choice when choosing a system? Or do they find it stigmatizing to even have their kid have to carry a device around with them? Do they want their child to present more neurotypical and not have to use an iPad to communicate? And so these are kind of some common examples of why a device might get abandoned. And then some tips for prevention would be to involve the learners and guardians in the entire process. So making sure that it's something that they have heavy buy-in to and that they're adequately trained to use. So do they know how to find all the words on the talker? Do they know how to fix it when it's broken? Do they know who to ask if they don't know how to fix something? Can they talk openly about concerns about stigma or difficulty of use with the AAC system? Do they have kind of a support system that can walk them through why this is essential, how this looks, and everything? We also want to be recognizing a preference for a specific form of AAC. I know we have clients who really hate the iPad eventually. They have used it before, and then all of a sudden, anytime that it's presented, they're not liking it. They're pushing it away. They're running away from it. They're leaving it behind in different settings when they used to carry it around. And then introducing a different system if needed, or finding a way to make that system more fun, more engaging for them. And just making the kind of whole process fun. You know, kids like to learn language as 2 and 3-year-olds because it's fun. They get to engage with their parents. They get to engage with other peers through their vocal language. So you want to make sure that you're keeping it fun and not just asking them questions and having them use their device, their system, just for, you know, work time tasks. Have them tell jokes. Have them say silly things. We have one kid who likes to make the joke about something being yucky. Every time that he's eating lunch on his talker, he'll hit yucky, and then he wants the tech to go, no, 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 yummy, because it brings him joy. And those are the kind of things that we really want to encourage. And then also creating an upkeep plan about who is responsible for maintaining, charging, and backing up the device. Is that parents? Is that the SLP? Is that going to be the BCBA? Who's in charge of making sure that the device gets fixed if it's broken? And then also joining a support group with others using AAC. I know different Facebook pages can be really helpful for this with parents. If they use TD Snap, there are the TD Snap app Facebook pages that they can see if there's anything wrong with their talker, or it's a lot of other people have gone through these different struggles. And then some additional AAC resources, like I said, the AAC Visualized book, I really like for a variety of reasons. I also found some really good trainings at the DoBetterCollective.com website, and then the different AAC page, or the different Facebook pages. And I also know that a couple of our clients have gotten SGDs through the iTac phone company thing, where they can give you kind of that lifelong loan. If you have a specific phone company and you qualify, they will give you that lifelong loan and allow you to, you know, they'll help fix it or help you find resources to fix it if it breaks. And so that's been really easy access for some of our families that, you know, previously would not have been able to gain access to it.